bloody fingerprints. Rome was in terror by December 43 BC, the last month of Octavian's consulship. Roman citizens were fleeing for their lives. Soldiers with drawn sword in one hand, a list of names in the other, were searching streets and houses. The Senate was powerless to stop them, for now 3 dictators working together had seized control of the government. Those 3 dictators, known as the Triumvirate, had signed a proclamation calling for the wholesale murder of their enemies. One of the 3 was young Octavian. It would be a happier thing if we could skip this black page in the story of that young emperor-to-be, and recall only his later years, known as the Great Augustan Age. But that would be to write propaganda and not history. For the sake of truth, the whole story of his rise to power must be told. Signing his name to this proclamation is part of that story. Another signature was that of Antony. The senators had celebrated their victory over him too soon, and as Cicero feared, they had let the foul and deadly beast escape. That, like brushing off Octavian, was a mistake for which they were to suffer. It gave reason for those 2 former enemies to unite against their common enemy, the Senate. They were brought together by an older gentleman named Lepidus, the 3rd man in the Triumvirate. He was a man of 60 years or more. It was to him, at his camp at Forum Julii, that Antony had fled when he had made his escape the night following the battle. Lepidus, after receiving Antony, had written to Octavian, suggesting that he join forces with them. The letter had reached Octavian just at the right moment, just when he had made up his mind to break connection with the Senate. To join Antony and Lepidus had then appeared to be the best thing for him to do. The idea of forming a triumvirate also appealed to him. In that, too, he was following in his great-uncle's footsteps, for Julius Caesar himself had once been part of a similar 3-man dictatorship. That was the first. And this one, formed by Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, was the second triumvirate. The first meeting of the Big 3 took place in October in Cisalpine Gaul, on a very small island in the middle of a river. In preparation for the great event, a tent had been erected on the little island, and 2 narrow bridges built, one leading from each bank. It was to be a very secret meeting. Each man was to go to the island alone and unguarded. All their troops were to remain on shore. Accordingly, at the appointed hour, out from one bank could be seen the spindly legs of Octavian moving forward deliberately across one of the narrow bridges. At the same time, striding forth from the opposite bank, came a big, muscular fellow in a scarlet general's cape, which was caught and flung wide by a sudden breeze. Following him, knees and shoulders slightly bent, came an older man with gray, bushy hair. Thus 3 men, young, middle-aged, and old, approached the island. Each, as he stepped onto it, was alone and unarmed. That is, supposedly unarmed. Octavian and Antony, however, more suspicious than trustful, both took precaution to feel for hidden weapons before embracing too cordially. Convinced of their so-called friendship, the 3 men then entered the tent, seated themselves about the table, and got straight down to business. First they drew up an agreement that for 5 years to come they would rule Rome and Italy together. Then they divided up Rome's provinces in the west. Of those in the east, Brutus and Cassius still had control. Not until they had been defeated would Rome's eastern possessions also be in the hands of the triumvirate. It was decided, therefore, that while Papa Lepidus remained in Rome, Antony, assisted by Octavian, should set out for Greece or Asia, if need be, to defeat Brutus and Cassius and those armies which they now had raised and equipped. At this point, 2 tormenting questions arose to perplex these 3 ambitious gentlemen. Where would they get money enough to pay for the campaign? What about the enemies they would leave behind in Rome? On the third day, they worked out the answer to those questions. On that day, the three men drew up a list of their enemies, which included many wealthy men whose property could be confiscated. And they plotted the worst blood purge and wholesale murder that Rome had ever known. Their proclamation, preceding the list, began with the following false and self-righteous words. We, Marcus Lepidus, Marcus Antonius, and Octavius Caesar, having been elected to bring into harmony and order the affairs of the Republic, make the following proclamation. Seeing that the wickedness of those who have insulted us, who have plotted to destroy us, and by whom Caesar was slain, cannot be overcome by any kindness, we choose to anticipate our enemies rather than to suffer ourselves. Some of them have already been punished, the rest, with the gods' help, you shall shortly see chastised. One task yet remains to make war on the murderers of Caesar who are across the sea. And since it does not seem safe either for us or for you to leave the rest of our enemies here behind us, we must put them one and all out of the way. Therefore, with the blessing of heaven, we give command that none shall harbor any of those whose names are written here below. Whosoever shall bring the head of any one of them to us, if he be a free man, shall receive $500. If he be a slave, he shall receive $200, his freedom, and all the civic privileges of his master. The same reward shall be given any one who shall furnish information of their places of hiding. Then followed a list of names, including approximately 2,000 knights and 300 senators. With the publication of the list, the awful manhunt began, and terror struck the city. Those named on the list, as well as many who were not named but hunted out for private spite, were tracked down, slain in their beds, or murdered on their doorsteps. Every day soldiers came marching back to the forum, carrying sacks full of heads, to count and claim their coveted reward. One day, early in December, the right hand as well as the head of a man was brought to Mark Antony. On the large head, the gray hair lay thin and rumpled. The middle finger of the hand was slightly stained with ink, the hand that had written many consoling thoughts on the nature of the universe, on friendship, old age, and immortality, that would be read and enjoyed for centuries to come. It was the hand of Cicero. But that severed hand had also written the 14 orations against Antony, which he would never forget. Now, he cried with satisfaction, our list is complete. He ordered the head and hand of the dead orator hung up by the rostrum, that all might see, he said, the penalty for double dealing. That was December 7th, 43 B.C., the day of Cicero's death. After he had lost hope of saving his beloved republic, Cicero had returned to the country and his writing. On the day of his death he had been riding in the litter, trying to escape, when he heard the soldiers coming. Terrified till then, he suddenly became composed. He told the frightened, loyal slaves to set the litter down. A moment later, the soldiers, rushing up with drawn swords, found the old man sitting quietly, one elbow on his knee, his head resting heavily on his hand, as if utterly weary. Without a word he bent his neck to receive the blow, and knew no more. When the time comes, he had once said, I shall withdraw from life, not as one leaves home, but as from a temporary lodging place, on that brightest of all days, when I depart from the confusion of this world, I shall set out, I believe, for a far-off divine gathering of spirits. But If I am mistaken, in that I believe men's souls to be immortal, I am glad to be mistaken, and all my life I shall continue to believe it.